PPPs are not the private sector coming in and spending private money instead of public money. What PPPs are is the private sector stepping in and taking public money that is going to be spent anyway on the hospital or whatever. So it doesn't replace public money at all, it sucks it up. And one thing they do is have contracts that spread for over a very long number of years, so 25, 30 years. So when you set up a PPP, you are setting up a promise to pay the private company for 25, 30 years, this amount. You know, our children are going to be carrying this. So that's the first sort of background point. It's not replacing public spending, it's actually a contractual obligation to spend it on a particular company. You then start to look and say, okay, so the private sector's going out and borrowing money to build the hospital instead of the public sector borrowing money to build the hospital. Well, if a private company borrows money, they have to pay 1.5%, 2% higher interest than the public sector. So for a start, all the money that you have to borrow to build something like that, we end up paying higher interest rates for if there's a public-private partnership. So automatically, it's a more expensive way of doing it, just without even talking about operation or anything. Even the IMF say this. They say any PPP is bound to be more expensive in terms of the cost of money. Then you go through the tendering process for PPPs, and because they're incredibly complicated, because PPPs are supposed to be suggesting all sorts of different designs and so on and so forth, it's much more costly than ordinary tendering for building contracts, for example. And so in London, we experienced that in a really big way with the one of two big PPPs to repair, maintain the London Underground railway system. It cost us £438 million before work even started, just to get the contract. £438 million just for the contracts to finally be signed. And that's because, of course, you're paying lawyers' fees, you're paying accountants' fees, you're paying consultants' fees, you're paying for company time in preparing their tenders, etc., etc. It's a hugely expensive process, and there's a lot of people, accountants, lawyers, bankers, who make a lot of money out of that process. So even if the work never happens, there's some very happy people in the business sector. So they're hugely costly processes to start tendering. We've talked about efficiency already, because to offset that extra cost of finance, they would have to be incredibly much more efficient, almost impossibly more efficient in some sectors, because the cost of finance is so high. And then there's the risk of failure, and we've seen that in London. The two big London Underground contracts, not only that will cost us £438 million to sign, 7.5 years later they collapsed, and they cost us about the same amount of money again, because we had to pay off the bank debts after the companies had gone bankrupt. So these can be very, very expensive mistakes. We've just made another one. We're rebuilding a bit of the motorway around London. National Auditor's report estimates that it's wasted about £1 billion of public money just signing one PPP contract for one bit of motorway. And this is what we lost. So I mean, there's really very clearly a sort of bad record of performance here. Really high risks. Really bad value for money, and not a road to go down. In the UK now, they're so unpopular that the biggest right-wing newspaper, the Daily Telegraph, is now publicly leading a big public campaign to end PPPs. There's no one in the UK to the right of the Daily Telegraph, virtually. So I don't think they have much of a future in the UK, and I hope very much for your sake they don't have a future in New Zealand either.